In recent discussions online with the materialists, one thing has come up several times in arguments against my position, which is monistic idealism. The argument is that our perceptions of the world are evidence that there is a world outside mind. This argument is based on a logical misunderstanding. Our perceptions are a particular modality of our flow of subjective, conscious experiences. They are only evidence for that modality of conscious experiences, which happen, obviously, fundamentally in mind. The only thing that our perceptions of the empirical world prove is that there is a part of our flow of subjective experiences that we do not identify ourselves with. We identify ourselves with our thoughts and our emotions, not with our perceptions. But the fact that we do not identify with a part of our flow of experiences in mind does not mean that that part is fundamentally outside mind, or that it comes from outside mind. When we dream or when we have nightmares at night, we do not identify ourselves with the universe of our dreams. We think it's external to us. We think we inhabit it during our dreams. Yet, it is unquestionably in mind. It is simply a part of the activity of mind with which we do not identify ourselves. Similarly, it is a part of the activity of mind that we do not have under the control of our volition, of our conscious wishes. The schizophrenic hallucinations that some people have are fundamentally outside the control of their volition. A schizophrenic does not want to hallucinate, yet he or she does. Nobody would say that the hallucinations of a schizophrenic are fundamentally outside mind. They are in mind, but they represent the activity of a part of mind that the person cannot control with his or her conscious volition. When I look at an object like this, it's a very solid, concrete, colorful object. My perceptions of this object are undeniable. They are not under the control of my conscious volition. I cannot turn this into a rabbit or into something else just by wishing it. And I do not identify with it. When I perceive it, I do not think that I am it. But my perception of this object is in the flow of my subjective experiences. That is undeniable, and that's all that can be inferred and said from perception. Perception is not direct evidence for a world outside mind. At best, it can be used to motivate an inference of a world outside mind for other logical reasons, like why do we perceive the same world, why we seem to be sharing the same world, why do the laws of physics seem to be so independent from our volition. These are inferences, but perception is not direct evidence for realism or materialism or for a world outside mind. There are two fundamental logical errors at the very inception of materialism. The first one we already discussed. It's a logical error of materialism to mistake a modality of our flow of experiences, namely perception, that happens to fall outside the control of our conscious volition, and which we happen to not identify ourselves with, to mistake that for the existence of an entire universe outside mind itself. The other error is just as serious and also just as subtle. It is to mistake the image of a process for the cause of the process. You see, it is undeniable that there are very tight correlations between brain states and subjective states, what we experience. These correlations are empirically verified and they are undeniable. But materialists then jump to the conclusion that the correlations reflect causation. In other words, that the brain generates the mind. This is as absurd as to say, for instance, that flames are the cause of the microscopic process of combustion that generates the flames. Flames are just the way combustion looks. It is the image of the process, not the cause of the process. Similarly, brain activity, our brain states, are the image
of a process of consciousness localization. That process is what we call our personal selves, our egoic selves, localized parts of the broader flow of mind, the broader flow of subjective experiences. Now, the image of a process obviously correlates very well with the process. Flames, their color, their intensity, all kinds of things that one can derive from flames, correlate very well with the inside view of the microscopic process of combustion. Flames contain relevant information about combustion. But the flames are the way combustion looks. They're not the cause of combustion. For a very similar reason, our brain states, because they are a way our personal localization of consciousness looks from a second-person perspective, they contain relevant information about our subjective states. They correlate very well with our subjective states. They are the image of our subjective states when looked at from an outside, second-person point of view, in the same way that combustion, from an outside, second-person point of view, looks like flames. To come from this and infer that by some magical step the brain actually generates conscious experience is a terrible, although understandable, logical fallacy, whose effects we are suffering from for a couple of hundred years.
Monistic idealism, this notion that I put forward in my work, that all reality is fundamentally in mind, in the flow of subjective experience of my mind, your mind, and whatever mind is in nature, whatever mind is the underlying substratum of medium of nature, is a position that does much more justice to our direct experience and intuition of reality than materialism. Idealism basically states that reality is what it seems to be. It is concrete, because concreteness is a qualitative experience. It is colorful. If I touch an object like this, my perception of it is a direct apprehension of the nature of this object. Materialism, on the other hand, would postulate that everything I perceive, all the qualities of my experience, of my entire life as I can ever know, is actually generated inside my skull by my brain. I live locked inside my skull, according to materialism. The objects of the world outside, the reality outside my skull, is fundamentally abstract, purely quantitative, akin to mathematical equations. It doesn't have color, it doesn't have taste, it doesn't have texture, because color, taste, texture, and all qualities of experience, again, according to materialism, are generated by my brain inside my skull. So materialism would have you believe that the reality you experience is just a copy inside your head, that the real reality is radically different from your perceptions. It is so different that you can't even imagine it, because you cannot imagine something that does not have the qualities of experience. So when people say, when people hear me say that, okay, my philosophical, ontological position is that all reality is fundamentally in mind, they think that I am defying their direct intuition of reality, that this is a material object, concrete. I'm not defying any of that, I'm acknowledging it. It is materialism that defies it. It is materialism that says that what I feel when I touch this object, when I look at this object, all these things are just inside my skull, and that the real reality has very little to do with it. It is isomorphic to it in a very abstract sense, but it doesn't have any of the qualities of my experience of reality. Idealism accepts concreteness, accepts our direct experience, our direct apprehension of reality, and acknowledges it to be the real reality, not copies inside our skulls, not a virtual reality generated by our brains. I was recently asked by someone online, what do I make of the neuroscience experiments which show that an experimenter can predict the conscious choice of a subject before the subject is actually aware of having made the choice. And the experimenter can predict that simply by looking at brain activity of the subject, brain activity of which the subject is not aware. Materialists tend to use these results as evidence for causation between material brain activity outside mind and mental states, like the state of being aware of having made a choice. I don't think this can be concluded from it. I think, again, this is a logical fallacy, a logical error. All that this shows is that there is mental activity of which we are not self-reflectively aware. In other words, mental activity that although we may know, we don't know that we know. We are not self-reflectively aware of it. The way this fits in my model is as follows. According to analytical psychology, which is an empirically derived psychology, our personal selves, our personal psyches, our personal segments of the broader mental substrate of nature, if you will, is composed of two segments. One is what is called the ego, the parts of our mental activity that not only we know, but we know that we know them. We are self-reflectively aware of them. That self-reflectiveness amplifies those mental contents to the point that they obfuscate everything else. The other segment of our personal psyches is what is called the personal unconscious. Those are mental activities that are also our own, but they become obfuscated by the activity within the ego. These are things that happen within us, but which we do not know that we know. We are not self-reflectively aware of them, and as such, they become obfuscated. The experiments, in my view, show that certain choices are made in the personal unconscious. We are not self-reflectively aware of those choices. We do not know that we made those choices. That is in no way evidence that there is an entire universe outside of mind itself. See, what is funny about this whole discussion between materialism and idealism and all these isms is how wrong our culture has gotten it. Our culture has come to attribute to idealism the counterintuitiveness, the absurdity of materialism. And it has come to attribute to materialism the intuitiveness, the obviousness, the self-evident position of idealism. When I tell people that I think all reality is in mind, they think at first that I am saying that reality is inside our heads. The reality we experience is inside our heads, like a kind of dream. It's precisely the opposite. It is materialism that is saying that everything you experience is inside your head, that you have no direct access to the world outside of your skull, that your entire reality is a sort of virtual creation of your brain inside your skull. This is what materialism says, that your life is inside your head. Idealism says the opposite. Idealism says that when I touch, feel, and see this object is really outside my head. It is in mind, but outside my head, because it is my head that is in mind, not mind in my head. Idealism acknowledges the externality of the reality we experience, to the extent that it grants it to exist outside our heads. You know, to be honest, even the word idealism is a word I use with some reservation. I don't really like isms. I don't like the word because you see, if mind is the substrate of nature, then there is nothing that is not mind. Mind is simply what is. So to even state and use the word mind and link it to the concept of idealism, in a sense, is artificial. Because if all is mind, the word itself has no meaning. It does not identify a discernible subset of reality. Mind is simply what is. Idealism is simply what is. But I'm forced, in a sense, by the current state of our culture, to use the words mind, to use the ism, the concept of idealism, to defend my position, because realists and materialists, in other words, the mainstream worldview of our culture today, has invented the idea of an entire universe that is not mind, that is fundamentally outside mind. They have given artificial meaning to the word mind, to the concept of idealism, meaning that it intrinsically doesn't have, because it is simply what is. It is legitimate for me to use the words mind, consciousness, subjective experience, and idealism, all these words, because I need to argue against people who have invented things that are not mind, consciousness, subjective perception, or idealism. I am forced to use these words, but it should be noted that I use them with a lot of reservation. I would rather not need to use them at all. For me, in my worldview, the very word mind is meaningless. It is simply what is. It is the substrate of what is. There is nothing that is not mind. We shouldn't need the word at all. And my position shouldn't even be considered an ism. It is simply what is.